a lot of factors to consider. So you need to consider the antigen that the antibody was raised against, and where that epitope falls, where on the protein it falls, what isoform it's recognizing.
I'm recording it. So
you need to look at the sample type. You want to make sure your protein of interest is actually expressed in that sample type you're working with. So this is where a positive control would be very useful.
See, I'm going to
record.
So this means I'm recording.
Okay. That's been used,
so like
protein and the antibody you're working with.
So it's the software that records everything that's on the screen.
Frozen sections, or cytological preparations, etc.
So you will see it later?
If you're looking at the
we can
antibody,
save it for the lab.
You want to look at the species cross-reactivity of that antibody.
I think it's recording the microphone.
When you're looking at the protein, where that protein is going to be localized in the cell or on your tissue. So where do you expect it when you see your staining? You also want to look at the fixation technique that's best used with that antigen and antibody combination, and then whether antigen retrieval methods are required and what those antigen retrieval methods require. Finally, the antibody working concentrations and solutions that have been used before, and the species that the antibody is raised in are also important factors to consider. So we're going to go through these today and in more detail.
Great job!
And this is just a basic workflow of your entire process. So we're going to talk about sample treatment, sample preparation, and then immunostaining. So I just want to distinguish what these terms all mean. Sample treatment is your first step. You may or may not use this step in your experiment. Then you move on to sample preparation, and then your immunostaining protocol, and that would be IHC or ICC. Finally, your analysis, and then hopefully the end goal would be a publication. And I'm going to go through these in the next few slides. So, sample treatment, what does that mean? Sample treatment refers to the modifying of protein expression in your sample, so whether that's cells or whether that's within the animal in vivo. If you're working with cells, you may need to treat your cells with an appropriate inhibitor or activator to upregulate or downregulate a protein in the cell. If you're working in vivo, it's the same thing. You're going to upregulate or downregulate that protein expression. So when you're working in vivo, there's a lot of factors to consider, of course, because it's a living animal. The potency of the inhibitor or the activator, the agonist or antagonist, the selectivity of it. You don't want any downstream effects, that are non-specifically causing some non-specific binding to whatever the protein is. You want to be sure that the cell is permeabilized and that the chemical can actually penetrate through the cell or the blood-brain barrier if you're working in the brain. You want to be sure that the chemical you're working with is soluble in solvents that you're going to be that's close to the most closest in vivo state that you're working in, and also the route of administration and what's best for you, whether that's an injection or oral. And then finally, when that's all done, that's when you harvest the tissue for sample preparation. In sample preparation, this is a breakdown of what this is referring to. We refer to sample prep as the fixation of the tissue, the embedding of the tissue, sectioning, and then the antigen retrieval. From there, no matter what your sample is, the immunostaining protocol is pretty similar, where you use a blocking solution, the incubator is the primary, incubator is the secondary, adding the enzyme substrate if you're doing colorimetric detection, and then finally cover slipping and observing. So now I'm going to talk about the different specimen formats that you might be using. The most commonly used specimen format in immunohistochemistry is paraffin-embedded tissue sections. These are usually formalin fixed. Now the reason these are the most common is because they have the most optimal balance between the preservation of the morphology of the tissue and the antigenicity of the protein. And the antigenicity of the protein is just defined as how well the antibody and the protein will bind and stay bound to one another throughout the process. So paraffin-embedded tissue sections are very stable and very easy to work with. Now there are always disadvantages to all these different formats, so I will mention those. It requires dewaxing before immunostaining. This is really a time-consuming process, and we're going to go into that in more detail. It does require antigen retrieval if it's fixed with a cross-linking reagent, which most of these are, the aldehyde agent, and we're going to talk about the different fixation techniques in a bit. So that's an additional step on top of the dewaxing. And typically these are only suitable for 4-micron thick sections. If the sections are any thicker than that, the antibody might get trapped and it might result in a false positive staining, which of course you don't want. Another common format is frozen tissue sections. Now these, when Abscam says immunohistochemistry with frozen sections, and we say this on our data sheet, this refers to non-aldehyde link fixation. So this is ideal for antigens that cannot withstand aldehyde fixation and paraffin processing. So these antigens tend to be in a more native state. Now the disadvantage to these is that the morphology of the tissue can be poor because it's not fixed with an aldehyde. So compared to paraffin, it just might not look as nice. It's technically more challenging because of this. And the samples, because of this as well, are more fragile. So antigen retrieval is more risky and you don't want to do that. Again, these are typically used for very thin sections, the 4 to 10 microns. And again, any thicker sections may trap the antibody, resulting in false positive staining. So if you're working with a type of tissue that you cannot section that thin, this is when you want to consider free-floating tissue sections. This tends to be with brain tissue and spinal cord and developmental research. This is all really useful. It's a useful technique. So these could be used for thicker sections up to 40 microns. The disadvantage is it's a bit more awkward to work with because, as the name implies, you're not mounting these to the very end. These are going to be free-floating throughout the entire process. Use a lot of solution, and then at the end you have to mount them on the glass microscope slide, and that's going to be difficult. And the other thing is, a lot of times, especially if you're working in neuroscience, the animal does get perfused with BFA, and then that is obviously a very more challenging step too. So each of these have their advantages and disadvantages, but it depends, what works best for you. And finally, I just wanted to mention what cytological preparations are, because we talked about that a bit earlier. These are commonly in the form of conventional smears. You may see this referred to as thin prep monolayers on a microscope slide. And you can think of this as taking an endothelial smear, like a cheek swab, and putting it on a slide. Or these are also, cytological preparations are also cell lines that are grown on chamber slides, flat cover slips, or 96-well imaging plates. Again, use the most appropriate format for your experiment in terms of both the practicality and the antigenicity, how well that will bind to the antibody and the protein will bind to one another. So I'm going to talk more about fixation methods. I know I've mentioned them already, and so clear these up in case you have any questions. So comparative, again, why do you need to fix your tissue? If you don't fix your tissue, you're going to lose it all. So you want to keep, and you also want to keep your tissue as close to the in vivo state as possible. Because when you're cross-sectioning the tissue, you want to look and see what is this looking like in real life. So this is achieved by fixation. In fixation, you usually immerse the tissue in the fixative, whether that's an aldehyde base or an alcohol base, and we'll get into the different types in a bit. And that will penetrate tissue and biologically inactivate the proteins by creating conformational changes in the tertiary structure of the protein. Without fixation, you will lose your protein during the tissue processing stage, and you will see no staining. Certain antigens are only present for minutes after tissue removal, so you have to work very quickly. And as tissue dies, there are natural things occurring that will cause it to lose its morphology. Proteases that are in the sample will digest the protein. The cells will undergo necrosis, and they'll undergo autolysis, and then you'll have bacterial attack as well. So you need to move quickly with your fixation technique. Formaldehyde-based fixatives, these are usually the most commonly used, except unless you're using frozen sections. Usually these are in the form of either formalin or paraformaldehyde, and these are all formaldehyde-based fixatives. So formalin tends to be in a 10% neutral buffered formalin, and that contains a content of 3.7% total formaldehyde. Paraformaldehyde is a solid polymer of formaldehyde, and so a 4% solution has the same fixative capacity as 10% formalin. Now what formaldehyde does is it forms these I'm going to use a laser here. These cross-linking bridges here, you see these red lines. What that is forming these cross-linking bridges in the protein's tertiary structure to keep it in its conformational state and keep it fixed. Now the disadvantage of this is if your antibody is trying to bind in any of these sites and it cannot penetrate through, that's going to result in no staining, and that's why the antigen retrieval step is very important. And we'll go into more detail about that in a bit. So as I mentioned, aldehydes, they're non-coagulative and they're cross-linking, like I just showed in those images. These are formaldehyde, paraformaldehyde, and formalin. These cross-linking bridges are methylene bridges, so they cross-link lysine residues on the external surfaces of adjacent proteins. The cytoplasm you could think of is transformed into a gel-like network. So the cell is rendered in stasis, which is as close to in vivo state as possible, which is the goal. Other common fixatives in immunohistochemistry and immunocytochemistry are protein denaturing agents. So these are precipitants and coagulants. Commonly, these would be acetic acid, methanol, ethanol, and denatured alcohol. And the protein's tertiary conformation is altered by the disruption of the internal hydrophobic bonds in that tertiary structure. However, the secondary structure is preserved because the hydrogen bonds within that structure are unaffected. So it's pretty close to its native state. No covalent cross-links are made, unlike the aldehyde fixatives, so you don't need to do antigen retrieval. The antibody will be able to penetrate in and bind to the epitope it's looking for. Protein denaturing agents are ideal for antigens that are sensitive to this aldehyde fixation. So it's critical to establish a strict fixation regime once you have your tissue and your antibody. You want to stick to that the entire time. There are a lot of factors that will alter your fixation, whether that be how rapidly the fixation will penetrate, so how long you need to put the tissue in the fixative. The specimen size, of course, with greater surface area is going to result in a slower fixation. So you should be as small as possible to ensure complete immersion. The concentration of the fixative, the duration, and the temperature of the fixative are all important factors. So the more concentrated, the higher temperature and the longer duration, all are going to result in a higher degree of fixation. And it is possible to overfix, so finding that exact time and concentration and temperature is critical. So now I'm going to pass this off to Tom, and he's going to take you through the rest of the talk. And he's going to talk about processing tissue into paraffin wax.
Thanks, Brendan. So just touching briefly on processing tissue into paraffin wax. This is, as Brendan mentioned, the most popular sample preparation, or the most common, basically because it preserves the morphology of the tissue, and the samples are easy to store for a long time afterwards. And the aim of the processing is to move the tissue from an aqueous state to an organic transition, and that way the paraffin can permeate the sample. And it takes about 12 hours total, and involves moving through a series of baths of alcohol, and then a couple of hours in a xylene organic clearing agent, and then finally into molten paraffin. And you see here the examples of a few blocks of tissue that are oriented to paraffin. So most people have a core facility that will do all this for you, so I'm not going to go into the details of the processing. Important though, if you're going to hand off your tissue to a core facility, to let them know what orientation you want them to embed the sample in the block, because that's going to determine what your cross-section looks like when you go to create a section. They'll often, in most cases, cut the sections for you, but the orientation is up to you. A couple of things to be aware of when you're processing a sample for paraffin embedding. Alcohol itself is protein denaturing, will influence the antigenicity, that is the interaction of the antibody and the antigen. And later stages occur at 60 degrees, and that can degrade some antigens. So the take-home message is that not all antigens will survive paraffin process. in these cases, preparing your samples in as a frozen block, frozen tissue, may be more appropriate. Those samples in that process will not degrade the sample as much as paraffin processing. In general, antibody vendors will know whether an antibody is compatible with the formalin fixation. So just check the data sheet or give them a call. Moving on to antigen retrieval, Brendan mentioned this is an important component for most immunohistochemistry. It reverses the masking effect of aldehyde fixation by breaking methylene bridges between adjacent proteins. Those methylene bridges will hinder access of the antibody to the epitope that it wants to recognize. And some antigens will stain weakly or not at all if antigen retrieval is not performed. There are two main common methods. The heat-induced, sometimes you'll see the acronym HIER, that stands for heat-induced epitope retrieval. And common buffers that are used are sodium citrates, or at pH 6, or EDTA pH 9. And by heat, we're referring to actually boiling the tissue section, or close to boiling for 15 to 20 minutes. The alternative to that is an enzymatic antigen retrieval, and the enzymes are commonly used are trypsin, pepsin, pronase, proteinase K.
Yeah, I need to finish the phone. I know. Oh, that's some webinar. The phone.
It's not
But
sure.
there's no universal
policy
antigen
and
retrieval
procedure
solution.
for
So depending
volunteers.
on the antibody
All
and the
different forms
antigen,
they have to fill in to
one
become a volunteer here
choice
at
will be
UK.
better than another.
If he
Okay.
hasn't got one, let me
This
know and I
slide
can
showing a
send
couple
more
of
details.
examples. Two antibodies, one against the
I don't know.
receptor, another
Yeah.
against the
So you
cation.
have to talk about
And
that because
the
I didn't have the chance yesterday because
block
I'm
the
like,
effect of
I'll talk to her.
It's just an
dosing or no
FYI.
antigen
Sure.
retrieval at all, and showing that
This
we've
place
seen no
runs like
changes.
molasses.
And then applying
Okay.
Sure.
different buffers,
So if you
different
want
epitope retrieval.
Thank you so much,
Different buffers
Jay.
with different pHs give different effects. So for the progesterone receptor
You probably
antibodies,
need
the best
to
is
go
a
to
pH
volunteer.
3 like the HCl buffer,
it's officially.
or also pH 9 tris buffer is a good result. But for the E-cadherin antibody, the best result is seen with the pH 9 tris buffer or the 10.5. So those are the factors that can affect the degree of antigen retrieval, duration, temperature, composition, or pH of the retrieval solution, and the method that's utilized, whether enzymatic or heat retrieval. Moving on to detection systems. This is just a graphic showing what happens very basically. You have primary antibody that sticks to the chromogen, and in the top example here, we have a secondary antibody which in turn recognizes the primary antibody, and that's conjugated to a enzyme. And in the presence of a substrate in the chromogen, you get a colored product. And the bottom is just the same procedure, but instead of a enzyme conjugated secondary, that's showing us the fluorescent conjugated, fluorophore conjugated secondary, and giving a signal when that's excited at a certain excitation wavelength. There's a variety of different enzymatic reporter labels. The main ones that are utilized for immunohistochemistry are horseradish peroxidase and alkaline phosphatase. And they each have several different substrates which gives different colors. For horseradish peroxidase, the most common is the second that's listed here, the brown. The chromogen in that case is DAB, diaminobenzidine. It's alcohol insoluble. The top one listed here, AEC, that gives a red color. But it is alcohol soluble. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later, the solubility of each of these substrates. Also, the GAB plus nickel enhancer will give you a black color. For alkaline phosphatase, we have fat blue, fat red, and leucine listed here. And two of those are alcohol soluble and one is alcohol insoluble. So in each of these cases, that's referring to which mounting agents you should be using at the very end of the procedure. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. When selecting an enzymatic reporter label, consider that endogenous enzymes will be present within the tissue in many cases. So endogenous peroxidase in the tissue can react with HRP chromogen and produce retrieval. Endogenous alkaline phosphatase activity is found in a large depth is actually blocked by integrating tissue in a levamisole solution. Although more practical solution is to simply use HRP instead of alkaline phosphatase. There's a variety of fluorescent reporter labels, and these emit light at varying wavelengths. And you see here a table showing a selection of different electrofluor dyes and the excitation and emission wavelengths and the colors of each. The choice of your fluorochrome is going to depend on the microscope, the filters that you have available to you, and the counterstains that you want to utilize. The fluorochromes and fluorescent counterstains are selected so their absorption and emission spectra do not overlap. So that allows them to each be excited and observed independently. So that's one of the main advantages with fluorescent labeling is that you see you're able to stain for multiple things in the same section and distinguish the signal that's generated for each of those. And there are programs available to check absorption and emission characteristics of fluorochromes. Your choice of enzymatic or fluorescent depends on your experiment and what you want to accomplish. The enzymatic labels can be applied to tissue sections. Fluorescent labels are often used for staining cell cultures, cytological preparations, and also frozen tissue sections. The benefit of fluorescence is that the channels can be viewed separately and merged into one pseudocolored image. It's easy to see signal co-localization between fluorescent counterstaining detection systems. And you can reveal weak staining. You can reveal proteins that are relatively not abundant. Basically, it can be more sensitive than enzymatic detection in some cases. But the two examples are showing here. This is the same antibody staining sections of cerebellum, and this is the new end rabbit monoclonal antibody. And the top is showing up for the enzymatic detection with the DAB reported label, and the bottom is showing in green the new end stain, and then also a red stain for GFAP. And that's a good illustration of the advantage of a fluorescent stain when you want to stain two things at once. The downside of enzymatic fluorescent staining is that some tissues have autofluorescence due to some tissue components being naturally fluorescent, such as collagen. Formaldehyde fixation increases autofluorescence, especially in the green channel, and it's strong enough you can mask the signal from fluorescent reporter labels, and that makes interpreting your data difficult. And that, in those cases, enzymatic detection might be the better choice. In general, cytological preparations of frozen tissue sections are not exposed to formaldehyde long enough to increase autofluorescence, and cytological preparations are often don't have the problem of having naturally fluorescent components. Okay, moving towards signal amplification. So we saw the earlier example, that graphic showing a directly conjugated secondary antibody. One of the advantages of that is that you can have multiple secondary antibodies binding to the same primary antibody, and that's in essence an amplification of the signal compared to if you were using a primary antibody that was directly conjugated to the enzyme or fluorochrome. So it enhances detection of weakly expressed antigens, and just as I said, multiple secondaries are bound to the primary, and secondaries can also be directly biotinylated, and that allows binding to an avidin biasing complex or an ABC complex. This table just showing different choices for detection systems. First, it's just a directly labeled primary antibody, and then the second is a labeled secondary, which gives you some amplification. Other choices include dextran polymer detection systems, and then also an avidin biasing complex, which is essentially a biotinylated secondary followed by a complex of avidin and biotinylated horseradish peroxidase or enzyme or alkaline phosphatase. And finally, micropolymers is another version of a polymer detection system. And those last three will give you the greatest amplification process the primary antibody, washing off the excess, and then incubation with the secondary antibody. There's no issue with endogenous biotin and low levels of signal amplification. Is the disadvantage compared to the polymer or ABC method. The first amplification system I mentioned was the avidin biotin complex, and as I mentioned, this is a complex of avidin biotin-related phosphorylated peroxidase, and that's similar to the amplification we'll achieve from a polymer-based system. It's 3 steps. It involves primary, secondary antibody, and then finally the ABC reagents. And one disadvantage is that a lot of tissues have endogenous biotin, and so that needs to be blocked if it is a problem. Otherwise, you'll see a lot of background signal that obscures what you're trying to detect. And finally, additional note, strep avidin gets less background than avidin. Avidin is positively charged, and with strep avidin, with this neutral, there's less potential for electrostatic binding. But in commercial kits, that'll be accounted for in most cases. The dextropolymer detection system that I mentioned, this graphic shows you the secondary antibody that's conjugated to the dextropolymer backbone, which is that blue line, and then the little orange circles are the enzyme recorders. So that gives you a big amplification as well. It's relatively large, and so access to some tissue, some components of the tissue might be difficult. In those cases, the micropolymer, same idea, but using a smaller polymer with large linker arms for the enzyme. That's a way to get around the problems that you might encounter with the dextran polymer detection. Basically, it's better tissue penetration in these cases. Moving on to controls, that's the most important part of the procedure. Actually, in order to interpret your data correctly. Without the appropriate controls, any apparent staining is essentially meaningless. The point is to verify that the observed staining pattern is true, accurate, and reliable. And there's 2 control types. The antigen control, namely you'd like a sample that is a positive control, and if possible, one that's a negative control. So a sample that you know contains the protein of interest, and one that does not. And the second type of control is the reagent control, just to account for any non-specific binding of the reagent that you're using in the procedure. Moving on to counterstain. The counterstain, the utility of the counterstain is just to give you some context for the staining that you observe within the tissue. Most often you'll see hemotoxin used as the nuclear counterstain for light microscopy, and it produces this nice blue color. It's specific for DNA, so it'll stain nuclei. Basically the only thing you have to worry about is if you counterstain for too long, then the morphology of the nucleus will be lost, and you might see too much staining, background staining the tissue around the matrix, etc. So this is a good example here showing, I think this is smooth muscle actin, staining a tissue section of colon tissue. And the blue in this case is just the nuclei themselves. So it gives you some context. Without that, you would just see some brown staining that doesn't necessarily make much sense. And the fluorescent detection system, again, most cases you want to stain the nucleus. In this example, the nuclei are stained with taffy. But you can also stain actin filaments or plasma membrane as a counter stain. Essentially, they need to be a color that you can distinguish from the stain for your protein of interest. So good for good contrast. Finally, the last step is the preparation for analysis. This involves a simple placing a glass cover slip on your tissue section. That's going to protect it and allow you to store it long term. And that is secured in place with a suitable adhesive known as a mounting medium. And it's important to note that some mounting medium are aqueous, and it's suitable for fluorescent enzymatic labels or organic. Those are generally suitable only for enzymatic labels. The refractive indices of organic mounting media match the refractive indices of fixed protein more closely than those of aqueous medium. The images are generally sharp, offer with an organic mounting medium. But the main thing to consider is that the aqueous mounting medium is what you need if your substrate and chromogen, the chromogen that you're utilizing is soluble in alcohol. You might find that if you use an organic mounting medium, it's going to wash away all the work that it does. So just be aware of that solubility in alcohol of your chromogen before applying any mounting medium. And that's the point I just made here. For instance, orthoractic peroxidase and the chromogen IHC reaction, that's alcohol soluble. It's going to disappear if you dehydrate and then clear a section with alcohol and dilute. Signal from fluorescent labels is most stable in commercial media containing anti-phage reagents. And then finally, some mounting media contain a counterstain already, typically DAPI, so that eliminates any need for a separate counterstain step in the protocol. In summary, the protocol needs to be optimized for each antigen, so plan your experiment carefully. You want to know which steps you want to test: the antigen retrieval, the dilution of the antibody. And also, if you're buying a commercial antibody, all this should be only available to you from the company. The data sheet should have some recommendations for how to carry out your experiment. So a lot of what I've talked about, these tests for optimizing the antibody, they're always going to be necessary if you're working with something that hasn't been tested for immunohistochemistry before. But at least you'll have some guidelines if it has been tested from the vendor of the antibody. You should definitely know what your ideal image should look like. So you should know what you're looking for and what other people have experienced. Mainly the location of the protein within the tissue. And you want to identify the controls that you need. So one example with isotype control would be substituting your primary antibody for the same isotype immunoglobulin, but that isotype control would have no specific reactivity, so that should be blank. And that's just to account for any interactions, protein-to-protein interaction of the antibody with the tissue section that's off-site. That kind of staining, that background staining, that has nothing to do with the specific staining. No primary control is an alternative, where you just leave out the primary antibody and carry out the rest of the procedure and that'll account for any staining of the secondary antibody off-site. And then the tissue control, if you have it, is useful to have as well to determine whether if you would have no staining at all, and a positive control stain, that would tell you that the issue is not necessarily the antibody, but the fact that either there's no protein in your tissue section, or that it's at a level below the limit of detection of the antibody. So review the protocol before starting to ensure the reagents are compatible with each other in this sample, the blocking reagents, primary, secondary antibodies, and the mounting media. So I'm going to hand it off now to Javier. He's going to talk about some of the products that Abcam offers for immunohistochemistry, kits and reagents. And Brenda and I will be back when he's finished in a few minutes to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Tom and Brendan, for the interesting presentation. Hello, everybody. Before I begin, I just want to remind you that you can keep submitting your questions for Tom and Brendan through the Q&A panel located at the right-hand side of your screen. We have a wide range of kits and reagents to support your IHC experiments, including Sera and blocking reagents, antigen retrieval reagents, chromogens, histology stains, and tissue slides. And I just want to take this opportunity to talk to you about some of these products that I think might be of interest to you. We have the largest and fastest growing collection of high quality Rabi monoclonal antibodies. We have over 7,600 RAMA products, and we are adding to this collection all the time. Our RAMA antibodies have all the advantages of the RAMA technology, namely high affinity, high specificity, and consistent performance. As you all know, if you're studying mouse proteins, you also get all the advantages of a monoclonal antibody without having to worry about non-specific binding. Our RAMA antibodies are extensively validated before we release them. All products are tested in multiple applications and species. For IHC, they're always tested on FFPE tissue microarrays containing human, mouse, and rat tissue. We also have a wide range of RAM-up antibodies that are directly conjugated to Alexa fluor dyes. Here, as you can see an example, this is our new-end RAM-up antibody AB177487. The image shows an independent comparison of commercially available new-end clones in IHC in acetone-fixed dentate gyrus sections from mouse brain. Competitor A is the leading mouse monoclonal, while competitor B is a rabbit monoclonal produced by another competitor. As you can see, AB177487 produces intense specific staining with minimal background, even at half the dilution of the competitor antibodies. We also provide Alexa fluor secondary antibodies. Our Alexa fluor secondaries are not standard products, but rather a premium range characterized by its high quality. We develop them in-house at our laboratories here in the UK, complying with high standards in regards to their conjugation and purification. Alexa fluor, as probably many of you already know, are ideal fluorescent dyes for multicolor analysis. We currently provide secondary antibodies conjugated to 9 different Alexa fluor dyes that cover the whole spectrum with minimum spectral overlap. These 9 dyes can be used with most common lasers equipped in current instruments. Some of these antibodies are specifically targeted to isotype subclasses such as IgG1 or IgG2A to facilitate multicolor experiments for which primary antibodies raised in different species are not available. Moreover, many of them are offered in a pre-absorbed form to ensure minimal species cross-reactivity while performing multiplexing. However, if you want to use direct methods to detect your protein of interest and can't find the conjugated antibody that you're looking for commercially, or if you would like to label an antibody that you've made yourself, we offer antibody conjugation kits that allow you to label your antibody quickly and efficiently. These kits are really easy to use. You simply add the modifier to your purified antibody, then add the antibody solution to the conjugate. After the incubation step, you then add quencher and incubate them. Your antibody will be ready to use in under 20 minutes for the fast conjugation kits and in around 3.5 hours for the standard kits. And your hands-on time is around 30 seconds. As there are no column steps, you will recover 100% of your antibody at the end of the conjugation. Our antibody conjugation kits are available for a range of fluorescent dyes, enzymes such as HRP, biotin, estradiol, and gold. In the last month, we have also introduced a range of kits to label antibodies with dye-like dyes. Brendan has told you about the differences between enzymatic and fluorescent detection. A common problem, as you probably already know with fluorescent detection, is that the fluorescent signal may undergo photobleaching, leading to loss of signal either during the experiment or storage. Our fluor shield mounting media for immunofluorescence are aqueous mounting media that are especially formulated to prevent photobleaching of commonly used fluorescent tags and to retain fluorescence during prolonged storage. We also offer fluor shield with DAPI or propylium iodide. I'm going to move on to the detection methods. Brendan has already mentioned our exposed IHC detection kits. These are micropolymer-based detection kits that are more sensitive than conventional polymer-based systems because the smaller micropolymers are better able to penetrate tissues than the large polymers used in conventional kits. As the kits are biotin-free, there is no background from endogenous biotin. Additional advantages are that our kits have a shorter protocol than most IHC detection kits and include chromogen, peroxide, and protein blocks to offer you a more complete solution. We also offer mouse-on-mouse detection kits that enables you to use mouse antibodies on mouse tissues and obtain clean background and a clear signal by following a simple protocol. Although we develop and support the use of this kit for enzymatic detection, I should also point out to you that this kit has been used by researchers for immunofluorescence. Finally, if you're interested in studying a large number of tissues in the same experiment, you may want to look at our tissue microarrays. Our portfolio contains over 200 microarrays, covering a range of species and pathologies, such as different tumor grades and TNM stages. Each slide contains up to 228 formalin-fixed samples. These samples are freshly cut to order, which has additional advantage that the specimen loss is very low. So I'd like to wrap up this section by thanking you all for your attention. Without any further delay, I will pass the microphone back to Brendan and Tom, who are ready to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Javier. We're going to start with a few questions we received. We have a lot of them, so we're not going to be able to get to all of them, unfortunately, in the next 10 minutes or so. One of the questions says, what's the advantage and disadvantage of using a monoclonal versus a polyclonal antibody? So you'll see, for example, in the ASCAN
So do you know how
catalog,
to
for
close
every
it?
protein
Here is
or
recording.
target that you're trying to stain. Some are
You just
monoclonal
stop
antibodies,
here.
some are polyclonal. In general, the advantage of